Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this work session of the Denville Board of Education. I'm going to call this meeting to order at this point. This meeting of the Denville Township Board of Education is being held in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act. Notice this meeting was provided to the Daily Record and/or the Star Ledger of Morris County, has been delivered to the Township Clerk, has been posted on the bulletin board of the Board of Education office, and at each of the school buildings in the district. Roll call, please.
Mr. Anderson?
Here.
Mrs. Sedalis?
Here.
Dr. Aruna Detasan?
Here.
Dr. Moore?
Here.
Mr. Kim?
Here.
Mr. Cass?
Here.
Mr. Capello?
Here. We don't have need for an executive session at this point, so if everyone would please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. All right, thank you. Steve, did you want to start? You want to start with the mid-year, or it's up to you, whatever you get that done first? Okay. All right. Yeah, Steve, whenever you're ready, we're going to see the mid-year presentation, right?
So we have our mid-year presentation on the student safety data systems and HIB for July 1, 2022 to December 31, 2022. So far in that time frame, we had 0 instances of substance abuse or weapons reported. We had 1 confirmed HIB case, 7 investigations, and this is a new category, 10 predeterminations, meaning those are the ones, it's been in our policy, but the new law requires that we report on it. We never reported on it, so we don't have data on how many there were. So what we do is when a case, even if it was found to be HIB, even if the case was truthful, like what's the word? On the face value, if it was accurate, it wouldn't be HIB, then we don't do an HIB investigation. That makes sense. Like if the claims of the victim would not be HIB, then it's not an HIB case. So there's 10 of those. There were 0 instances of vandalism, 3 instances of violence, and there was 5 students with disabilities that were suspended either in school or out. And then the police were notified 4 times, 9 in-school suspensions and 4 out-of-school suspensions. And Mr. Capello asked me to just try to give us a little comparison of what it was like in 2019 to 2019 July 1 to December 31, 2019. So I went back there and we had 2 substance abuse, 0 weapons, 3 HIB cases, 7 investigations, 0 vandalism, 6 violence, police notified once, 9 in-school suspension, 2 out-of-school suspension, and 1 person with an IEP was suspended. So So the data is pretty similar, pretty consistent to what it was prior to COVID. So we definitely had some increases last year, but as of right now, it's starting to come back to what the levels were like before. But I'm going to knock on wood. Okay, so that's the 2019, and then the second slide, Rick, would be just the things that we do throughout the year to prevent bullying and HIB would be, we do training. So there was 28 different trainings. There were 41 programs this year. Some of the things we do is it's embedded in teaching and learning. We foster student relationships. We talk about safety, parental support, physical and emotional environments, and morale in the student community. During the strategic planning process, one of the big things that came out was the SEL we do. So we do a lot of different SEL programs. SEL stands for social emotional learning. And those are the types of programs that we do, that we put in place to try to help with the bullying and harassment throughout the school year. And that's my report for today. If the board president's okay with it, I'll take questions if there are any.
Yep, no, that'd be great. Any questions for Dr. Forte on any of that?
Just one quick question. Dr. Forte, I noticed, and you mentioned a little bit about predeterminations. There were 0 in 2019. That was something, like you said, that we've only started to recently implement?
We've always done it. We just never had the report on it, so we didn't track it. It would have been much more informal. A predetermination would have been a call from the principal asking me my thoughts, maybe running it up to a couple other people, and then deciding whether or not an HIB investigation needed to be done. Now it has to be, the checklist we use the checklist. If you guys have seen these now, probably you see the checklist before and then the checklist after. The first checklist is deciding whether or not we need to do an HIB. Then the second one would be whether or not it is HIB. So in a predetermination, only the first checklist is done, conversation with the principal, discussion, I review it, and then we make a determination on whether or not we need to do an investigation. Sometimes we tell them, even though it might not be bullying, let's do the investigation anyway. But the new law that was put in place for this school year requires that we track it and report on it.
And then just to follow up on that, whether it's predetermination, HIB or non-HIB, particularly non-HIB and predeterminations, that does not mean that action's not taken, there's not counseling or support provided, correct? I mean, HIB is obviously the rule we need to follow, but I want to make sure that we're going above and beyond to make sure if there's issues, we're supporting the students.
So the predetermination typically is some type of infraction that is going to be handled with the student code of conduct, meaning there will still be disciplinary matters. Doesn't mean it's a suspension. It could be, the restorative programs we put in place. So there's something involved there. And then even in an HIB case, there can be discipline as well through the code of conduct. So yes, the answer to the question is just because a case is found not to be HIB doesn't mean that it won't be handled through the code of conduct.
Great, thanks, Steve. Anyone else have any other questions? Okay, I think we're good. Thanks. I'll let you continue with your comments when you're ready. I guess you're also doing the comments for Sandy tonight.
Yes, I am.
Okay.
So a couple announcements about Valley View Winter Athletics. The girls basketball team was Morris County Group 3 champions. They finished an undefeated 16-0 season. So yes, that was a great job by them. And the boys finished second in the county. Another great accomplishment. Our teams are typically pretty good. Like we're pretty competitive as a rule. Spring sport, our softball and baseball will start on March 20th. If depending on the weather, we do contract with an indoor facility if they need it to get some practice before. If the weather's okay, they go outside. Intramural volleyball has started as well. And our strategic planning update, our committees for each goal and objective have been meeting. Some of them are starting to wrap it up, and we expect to have something to the board for approval in probably either April or the first meeting in May. And we'd like to have the board approve the entire strategic plan, which remember is the goals and objectives, not the actions. That's the The how is what we determine, the what is what you determine or you approve. And then we'd like to have that in place, ready to go for 7/1. So we'd like to get that approved in June. Most likely I'll take the goals, put them on an agenda before I go to the graphic artist, because I'd like to get the goals and objectives approved. And I'd like to have the graphic artist, somebody that can put it together better than I can and make some type of a nice poster, something like that, that we can post around the district. And then I'll get that final project approved by the board in June, and then we're going to get moving on it. So that's the deal with the strategic planning committees. There's 5 committees. Each one has representation from staff, administrators. There's parents on some of them, and there's basically a few meetings, conversations, a little bit of side meetings too. If the committee can break into a subcommittee, there's been a couple of those. And then at the end, the finished product will be the entire, each committee, each of the 5 goals will have a list of objectives with action plans for each objective. And then if there's funding, like for example, Damaris's, like there's one thing on there on what do we do with the increase, there's going to be a funding mechanism as well. And Damaris will be dealing with that one. She's in charge of the committee on operations. So they're moving along, and we, like I said, we should be ready to go and moving on it on July 1st. Oh, I'm going to move on to my assistant superintendent's comments for Dr. Cullis. The kindergarten pre-registration for 23-24 has been open. It's been on our social media, and anybody, if you, I'd love it if you guys can repost those if you could. They're on, I know I put it on our Facebook, our Twitter. Anybody repost it. The Facebook, last time I checked, which was mid last week, there was about 1,500 views on it. So somebody was reposting it somewhere, which is good. And so the kindergarten pre-registration is open. The current pre-registration right now stands at 133. And also, you could push this out to the public. You can retweet and repost my Facebook posts on Dr. Michelle Borba. We'll be at Riverview on May 22nd for a program on raising children, modern day raising children. I'm looking forward to seeing it. And that's it for the assistant superintendent comments.
Okay, thank you. Anyone have any comments or questions about superintendent or assistant superintendent comments? Okay. Damaris, anything from the business office?
One comment. The audit 21-22 was presented during the month of October 2022. During the meeting tonight, on the agenda is the audit report, the finalized audit report to be approved. I put it as an action item because I do need to submit it within the next 2 weeks to the county and upload it to the homeroom page in the Department of Education. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
And if anybody wants a hard copy of the audit, I do have them available. There is an electronic copy on the shared drive.
Damaris, do you happen to know how many board members have done their financial disclosures yet? I just want to remind everybody that they
I
need
just
to be
have
done.
2 open board members that need to complete the
So
financial
if
disclosures.
that's you, yeah, I think you have another month or so to get it done, maybe a little more, but
April
don't wait.
30th.
Yeah, try not to wait.
Thank you.
Damaris, just the audit report, that finally has the state numbers, right? That's been the delay on approving it officially?
That is correct. The Division of Pension did not release the liability number until late January, and the audit report needed to be updated with those numbers. It does not impact the financial on the school district, but it's a liability, it's an in and out liability, and asset liability that needs to be reported.
Thank you.
Damaris, I'm going to ask you to do one more thing, if you wouldn't mind, just for the public and for the recording. Could you recap the budget presentation schedule that's going to be happening over the next few meetings?
The preliminary budget will be for approval during the March 13th board meeting, and the final hearing for the budget will be during the last meeting in April. I want to say the 25th of April.
I think it's the 24th on the agenda. Is that?
So it is the
24th.
24th,
Okay,
sorry.
cool. No, not at all. Thanks. Okay, if nothing else, we'll move on to open public meeting. This is going to be for agenda items only. I'm going to read the text. This portion of the meeting is open to any individuals for the purpose of addressing resolutions on this agenda or matters they find is important to the Board of Education and is governed by Board Policy 0167. Prior to making a comment, members of the public are required to state their name, addresses, and the subject matter of the comment. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. No participant may speak more than once on the same topic until all the others who wish to speak on the topic have been heard. Comments made by members of the public may or may not be responded to by the board or district administration. Any response that is provided will be made at the end of the public comment period after all comments have been heard. The board asks that members of the public be courteous and mindful of the rights of other individuals when speaking. Students and employees have specific legal rights afforded by the laws of New Jersey. Therefore, comments regarding specific students, employees will not be responded to by the board. The board bears no responsibility, nor will it be liable for any comments made by members of the public. Members of the public should consider their commitments in light of the legal rights of those affected or identified in their comments and be aware that they are legally responsible and liable for their comments. All statements, questions, or inquiries shall be directed to the board president. I'm going to open at 7:46 p.m.
Dino, no members of the public are currently logged into the online meeting.
Okay, thank you. No one who's present with us would like to speak? You got it. All right, seeing no one approach, I'm going to close also at 7:46 p.m. and we'll move on to old business, no action to be taken. Mr. Anderson, would you care to move us through these items?
Sure. At the next meeting, myself or someone else will move through several items under old business, including the reports from January 2023, Treasury of Schools Money, Board Secretary Report, our education reports, which include Report of Student Enrollment January 2023, Report of Health Office January 2023, Report of July 1st through December 31st, 2022, SSDS and HIB mid-year. That was what Dr. Forte just presented, as well as one HIB case. And then our minutes from the reorganization session meeting January 3rd, work and executive session of January 3rd, and our regular and executive session of January 23rd.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Anyone have any comments or questions on these items before we move on? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to new business action to be taken. Dr. Moore, would you care to move us through the personnel items tonight?
Sure. I'd like to move the following items under personnel. Item number 1, some A through G, some instructional aid, retroactive pay, some leave replacement teachers extending their contracts, increase to full-time for the technology support specialist, and retirement of LDTC teacher. Item number 2, leave of absence. Item number 3, to approve a transportation aid to be mentored and trained. Item number 4, to approve a custodian mentor and training as a school bus driver. And item 5, A through I, is a list of substitutes, teachers, nurse, and school bus driver.
I'll second.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. Thank you, Mr. Cass. Any questions, concerns here? Damaris, I have one. I see the 2 items to train aides as bus drivers. Is that, I mean, I don't remember seeing that before. Is that something new that we're trying to increase the bus driver pool, or does that just happen to be?
We have been doing this for the last few years now, where anybody who's interested in becoming a driver, we have a person in the transportation department that do train them. And once they pass the license, she will train them in the local roads and then they go back and take the CDL license, and they become our drivers. I do prepare a contract with them that they have to stay in the district for at least minimum of 2 years. Otherwise, they will have to pay for the training, for the investment that we make.
And that would include the training as well as this for the CDL?
Correct.
Gotcha. Thank you.
I would just offer congratulations to Mrs. Salvo on her retirement. Thank you for her service to the district.
Anyone else? Okay. If not, roll call, please.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Sedalis,
Yes.
Dr. Aruna Jatasan,
Yes.
Dr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Kim,
Yes.
Mr. Cass,
Yes.
Mr. Capello.
Yes. Okay, moving on to instruction and program. Mr. Anderson, would you move us through this item?
Sure. If there are no objections, I'd like to move under B, instruction and program, item number 1. The board approved the New Jersey State Police Marine Service Bureau to provide an ICE safety program for our elementary school students.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Yeah, do you want to, I mean, you,
So the New Jersey State Police, they operate the Marine Police as well. And they contacted us to see if they want, because we have a lot of lakes in town, they wanted to see if we wanted to have a water safety program, basically because we have so many lakes around and it's an issue. So I spoke to both principals. They were interested in it. It'll be outside at both schools coming up sometime soon. And I just wanted to put it on the agenda just because it's a little different than what we normally do. And I figured I wanted the board to understand that we were doing it, but I think it's something that's important for particularly our population, just because we have so many lakes and there have been some instances of people falling in lakes that have been frozen or partially frozen. And we've even had some people, pass away from that. So I think it's a good thing to put out there. So that was why we did it. The New Jersey State Police Marine Services Police contacted me and asked me if we wanted to do it.
that's great. I mean, obviously nice of them. It's a fantastic service. Would you mind if I drafted a letter that came from the board to say thank you? Could we put it on Denville letterhead to send it out after? Okay. Yeah, I'd like to. I think I'd like to do that.
Steve, is there a reason it's only for elementary? Was that just their?
Yeah, it's geared towards like grades 3, 4, and 5. That's the curriculum that they have. I asked that question.
Okay.
So that's why they're doing it for those kids. And they're going to bring like a boat and all that. It'll be pretty cool for the kids. They do it outside. Should be fun.
Do our police department, I guess, assume they know we're doing it? And
So I asked the police first. I asked our police if they thought it was worthwhile, and they said yes, definitely we should do it.
great. Thank you.
Just another thing for the middle schoolers. Does the county do anything in terms of that safety training? I mean, I know some of the fatalities we have were young adults. A couple of years ago, I went into Indian Lake, and I know when we do the polar plunge, which is still in existence today, we did it for a fundraiser for the playground, and now they're doing it for Sparks. I believe it was the county was there with a pontoon boat. It was like a training exercise for them too. So maybe there's something, a little bit more advanced or apropos for the middle school kids who may be more prone to be doing something without thinking on thin ice.
We can look into that and see if maybe I can even start with our OAM, see what they say.
I think it'd be a good idea. Anybody else before we go to roll call? All right, if not, roll call, please.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Sedalis,
Yes.
Dr. Aruna Jatasan,
Yes.
Dr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Kim,
Yes.
Mr. Cass,
Yes.
Mr. Capello.
Yes. Okay, moving on to finance. Mr. Kim, would you care to move us through this item?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Tonight, I'd like to motion that we approve Section C Finance, number 1, be it resolved that the board accept the 2021-2022 Comprehensive Annual Financial Audit Report, which has no recommendations, and the auditor's management report on administrative findings for the year ending June 30th, 2022.
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. Thank you, Mr. Cass. And I think I expressed the entire board's gratitude for Damaris for a completely clean and stellar audit report. I hate to say it's, become kind of expected, but, it has. But fantastic, no issues, nothing, nothing out of the ordinary. So thank you very much for that.
If I may, Mr. Capello, I want to also echo the congratulations and the thanks. According to the audit report from the auditors, Damaris is most likely going to be in line for another year of Certificate of Excellence. So I want to thank her for all her hard work as well.
Okay. I guess we'll have to write it in. There's no vote line here, but yeah, you'll call it. Okay. So roll call, please.
Mr. Anderson,
Yes.
Mrs. Adelis,
Yes.
Dr. Aruna Jatasan,
Yes.
Dr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Kim,
Yes.
Mr. Cass,
Yes.
Mr. Capello.
Yes. Thank you. Okay, moving on to no business. These are no action to be taken items. Dr. Moore, would you care to move to take us through what we'll be voting on next time?
Next session, either myself or someone else will move for approval the following items under personnel. Item number 1, A through H seem to be predominantly extra pay and then some cash in of vacation days. Number 2, leave of absence. Number 3, extended family leave. 4, leave of absence. 5 is a leave of absence. And 6 is the approval of the 12-month staff holiday calendar for 2023-2024.
Thank you very much. Any questions or comments on these items? If not, let's move on to instruction and program. Mr. Anderson, would you move us through these items for next meeting?
Sure. The next meeting, myself or someone else move through instruction and program. Item number 1 will be workshops with expenses. Item number 2 will be field trips. Item number 3 is a student from Caldwell University to complete an internship at Valley View during the 2020 this school year. Board, and then the final item is the board to approve a student from County College of Morris to observe at Valley View also.
Great, thank you very much. Any comments or questions on any of the I&P items? Seeing none, let's move on to policy and revisions. Mr. Cass, if you don't mind, I'm going to tap you for these.
Certainly. At the next meeting, we have policy revisions to be approved for a first reading. We have the Road Forward COVID-19 to abolish, school employee vaccination REQs abolish. And we have policies for board officers, call and adjournment and cancellation of meetings, notice of board meetings, bilingual and ESL education, emergency virtual or remote instruction, attendance, harassment, intimidation, or bullying, student discipline code of conduct, student enrollments, enrollment accounting, student records, and bomb threats, lockdown procedures, and active shooter.
Okay, great, thank you. These are all first reading items. If anyone has any questions or comments on any of them.
I'll just comment that the first 2 policies that we're abolishing, I cannot wait to, I wish we can fast track the abolishment of the Road Forward COVID-19 or the employee vaccination required. So happy to see them on the list of the abolish policy list.
All right, if nothing else, we're going to move on to finance. Mr. Kim, back to you for these items for next meeting.
Sure. During the next meeting, we will be voting on the 3 items listed on the agenda. Number 1 being the list of checks, which will be filled in later. And 2 and 3 are donations, 1 from the Denville PAL and 1 from the Valley View PTA.
The one, number 2 is actually split. There's $2,125 from Denville PAL and $2,125 from Denville Education Foundation.
Thanks for clarifying that. I misread that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And we'll be voting on this at the next meeting, but just to say thank you to all of these organizations for their donations. They're greatly appreciated.
And I would just note that I know this is part of kind of a bigger project that I know Dr. Forte has been involved with on just, always upkeeping our schools. But we've had some conversations recently just about certain little things, as much as like, hey, the banner was crooked or whatever. Dr. Forte has really done a phenomenal job of making sure that the schools look top notch. And certainly that's a pride thing for everyone. I think as little as like the painting that you did outside, I think that those types of things go a long way to really how people feel about our schools and the pride they have in them. So thank you for all the work you've done.
The good thing is, when I first came here, I was telling everybody the fact that things are broken is not as bad as the fact that nobody sees that they're broken. So now that we see that a banner is like a little off kilter, that's a good thing. Before we were talking holes in walls and missing rails and things like that. Now we got a banner that's a little off kilter, and now we're noticing that and correcting it. So that's a good culture change that we've done over the last few years.
I think the other important thing is the culture you've built with the community, right? I mean, the fact that we're going to pick up a third of the cost on this addition, but that the PAL and that the board, the foundation are going to pick up those other pieces. Those are because the relationships and the ideas you've come up with kind of finding creative ways to fund some of these things. Because at the end of the day, we want it to look great, but we may not want to spend $6,000, but maybe $2,000 is an acceptable level. So you've always kind of found ways to get creative with that. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate the partnership with those 2 organizations as well as several others that we work with closely. So,
and the athletic money from the foundation, I talked about this a while ago. I haven't talked about it in a long time, but the deal we made with the New York Giants NFL camp that comes to Riverview every year is that they provide $1,000 minimum donation to our foundation. And when I first started that, I asked the foundation to put that in a special account for athletics. And the money that we used so far, it's been about $10,000 so far. We used a few thousand on those banners. That was one of the first grant towards athletics. And the second grant towards athletics is upgrade of these of the chairs for the bench for the students to sit on. It's basically the bench, but they're individual chairs for it. So good use of the money, and also the fact that it's coming from an outside source too.
Definitely. Well, thank you. If there's nothing else, we'll move on to operations. Mr. Cass, would you care to move us through transportation? Actually, just looks like there's building and grounds items.
Yeah, we got a break on transportation tonight. Of course, there could be something there at the next meeting. Sometimes there's a surprise. All right, we do have building and grounds to talk about 2 items. We have the board to approve the memorandum of agreement with CCM for reunification 2020/23. And we talked about this at our committee meeting just about an hour or so ago, that this is something we've been doing now for about 10 years. When Chief Wagner was here, we put that together. So it's hopefully we'll never need to do it, but we do have that facility, and I believe we do a road test once a year, right, Dr. Forte?
Missed that part. What'd you
Yeah,
say?
on the memorandum agreement at CCM. I know we've done some test flights in the past. I don't know if that's a regular annual event or not.
We did do a drill reunification. It's pretty involved because it includes taking kids from our schools up to CCM, and we also have to do it when CCM is not operating, so we're not in their way. We did do it in 2018, and we took about 25 fifth graders up there from Riverview, and I picked that because my kid was in it, and figured if you're gonna make anybody, get be involved, and I made my wife come from her school to come up there and pick them up. So it was a good drill. We're talking about doing some other ones on a larger scale with the county. So I've been up there 2 other times to see other districts do it. I've seen the county VOTEC do it, and I've seen Randolph do it. So sometimes it'll be us, sometimes it'll be other places, but we pretty much do something each year. And it doesn't always have to be our kids, but we all work out the kinks together. So it's a pretty good group of people involved in this.
Thank you. The next item is that I'm going to ask the board to approve the use of facility request from DST Basketball. I'm familiar with PAL Basketball. DST, is that the adult group?
It's an AAU team, and they will be charged a fee. It's not a PAL team. It's not a local team. It's a travel team. Some of the kids are from Denville, but they are charged a fee according to our district policy. And it's on the agenda for approval for next meeting.
It's something being run by a teacher in our schools. Okay, yeah.
And just a quick question on that, Steve. I know it's a pretty wide range of dates, like March through July. I assume that there'll be some dates when we have like the play, or for whatever reason they're not able to get in. They understand that, and you'll coordinate that?
Yeah, they understand that.
Right, thank you. Anyone else on these items before we move on? Okay. If not, good of the cause. I know committee reports, I believe, were distributed.
We just had our finance committee meeting at 6 o'clock today, and there are some points I'd like to share, but is now a good time?
If you get that,
Yeah.
go for it.
All right. So we had our committee meeting again at 6 a.m. this afternoon, and just before the board meeting. And we did go through a number of things. One of the first things that we talked about, or one of the last things that we talked about, was briefly with regards to the increased student enrollment, as well as the possible options that we have to accommodate the increased number of students. So Steve, or Dr. Forte, was able to share with us that the diocese or the church is not willing to sell. So we now have the tough decision of deciding what we want to do and how we want to proceed. So we did talk about some specific scenarios, but the majority of the meeting today was to discuss, was dedicated towards discussing the upcoming budget. As we've hinted, whether it was the administration like Dr. Forte or from Damaris or from different board members, we will be faced with a very difficult year this year. Over the past 2 years, we did tighten the belts and keep the tax levy below 0.5% for the last 2 budget cycles. And I think this year we are going to see the ripple effects of that. So with the health insurance sudden increase, along with a number of different factors, we are going to probably see a potential tax levy that's higher than what we've seen over the past 5 years, or any of the numbers that we've seen in the past 5 years. So there are I think some hard decisions that we're going to have to make, and then I'll talk to each individual board member and see what the thoughts might be with regards to that. So a lot of interesting stuff that's coming up. So, but nothing that we can't handle, I'm sure.
So thanks for that. Steve, I'm going to ask you actually, because I know you and I have had this discussion, and I think it bears with what James was just telling us. In terms of contingency plans, I know you guys have some plans in place in terms of, what we may have to cut, what we may have to reduce on. I mean, can you talk to that and maybe some generalities, kind of, what your thinking is about kind of, plan A, plan B, plan C?
So we've made a lot of cuts to the budget already. So we've cut somewhere in the range of over $1 million out of the budget. One of the things we really need to start working on is really still coming out of COVID, because if you recall, when COVID was coming, right, there was a lot of unknowns. One of the things that was actually talked about but never came up was that it's possible that we weren't going to get our tax revenue, if you recall that. So what we did was we really tried hard to make some cuts in the budget for that year and pre-buy as much as we could, but that creates a hole in the next year's budget. So we're working on eliminating that. We also got in the habit of doing things where you're paying for things from the next year out of this year's budget, and we need to start eliminating that. That's becoming an issue. It especially becomes an issue when you have unexpected expenses come up that you need to pay for during that budget year, and now you don't really have the money to buy things for the next year. So we're going to continue talking about all these things. And other than that, at this time, I don't feel like I can say any other specific cuts at this time, but we're still working on it with the finance committee to just finalize what types of cuts that we're talking about making.
Great, thank you. Go ahead.
I think it's worth noting that, like Mr. Kim and Dr. Forte just said, this is like the perfect storm of everything that could be coming to a head at the wrong time. When you're talking about health insurance increases of 15%, we haven't seen that since Mr. Parisian was on the board. Honestly, right? We haven't seen it. We just haven't seen those types of increases, right? And that's under the state health benefit plan that was supposed to be a better option for us and has been, in their defense, it has been for years. Unfortunately, due to whatever it is, mismanagement, whatever, it's gotten to the point where 15.1% is our increase, right? I mean, that's a huge number. Everything's gone up, utility, fuel costs, right? I mean, special education costs are going up, right? The lease is coming to a spot where it's the highest amount it's been, right? The pre-buy, the fact that we've had extra revenue coming in with COVID money that we've been utilizing for a lot of things in an appropriate way, but that's been a revenue source for us. So with revenue getting cut and all these expenses going up, it's the perfect storm. It's unfortunate. Now, at the end of the day, if you look at the long term, we've been extremely financially conservative and fiscally responsible. These are things that we have to pay for health insurance, right? These are things that we're required to do, and we just have to find a way to do it. So, I mean, I know Mr. Kim and Damaris and Steve, you guys have worked really, really hard over the last couple of years on finding ways to be as fiscally conservative as humanly possible, and we've really done a great thing by the taxpayers. I mean, I hope S2 continues to increase because that's a little bit of a win that we can kind of bank on, right? We have not calculated that in as far as I understand at this point, correct? So we've budgeted for neutral, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So the initial budgets have that, so that's a win, but man, that's a small win compared to the stuff we're facing. So I'm glad we're talking about it early. I know this is not something you've just started to talk about, but it's been a few months now. So I appreciate it, and just let's keep looking for ways to try to minimize this as much as humanly possible. But I'm glad we're talking about it early so that the public knows it's not a surprise that it's a rough year when we talk about budgeting.
Yep. No, thank you guys for doing the work. One thing I'll add on that you didn't mention, but I think it's worth is that we're also facing a tight labor market from the top all the way down to aides, bus drivers, teachers at every level. That cost is going up, and when we can find good qualified people, which is also a struggle. So layer that in too. That just makes the storm a little bit more intense. So, but
just one more thing to add, and this is back to Mr. Kim's comment about like long-term future growth of the district and everything. And I know Dr. Forte and I had a conversation a few months ago about this. We don't know what it's going to look like. We're not 100% sure yet, but if the reality is we need more space, I want to make sure that we are going to overturn every rock that we can to try to find an option to not build, right? I mean, it may come down to it, but call the county and say, what's the number? Give us a number for VOTEC. They may say, I'm not giving you a number, but tell them, say, hey, you got plenty of property at CCM. Let us pick up the phone and call the whatever they're called, not freeholders, commissioners. Like whatever we have to do, we got to find a way. I mean, it may turn out to be nothing, but you never know what you're going to find. And all of a sudden, if we get, if we find something, I mean, let's call the Cardinals office. I don't know. Pick up the phone, right? We've got to overturn every rock to make sure that if we have to say we have to build, we're going to say we tried every way not to have to go to referendum because building is not fun. This room's empty right now, well, except for Mr. Parisian, but this room will be full of every neighbor from Nicole Drive if we have to build on that property. Every single one will be in this room screaming they don't want a school there, right? So it's not going to be fun if we have to. I know we've avoided and we've done everything possible. I think across the street's been a great short-term avenue, but we've got to, I know it's a long-term thing, but I really, really think we have to overturn every stone we possibly can. Call Celebrate the Children and ask them. Give me a number, right? Just tell these people, say, hey, we're looking for space. Give us a number, right? If it's possible. I don't know if it's going to turn into anything, but we have to try.
And I have personally done all three, so I'm open to you guys doing it as well. But I have had conversations or meetings with all three of the ones you just brought up, and all three said no. But that doesn't mean that maybe some other people can ask the same thing. All three have their own layers, right? They have different layers of approvals. So at my level, I was told no, that there could be like the political level above that might be something that you guys can work on as well. I'd be happy to support that or help you with that in any way.
Yeah, I think Mike's right. I mean, I think we should really, as a group, carry on this conversation and talk about maybe levers we can reach out to and people we can talk to, individually or as a group. School boards is a big believer in advocacy and us speaking as a group, and I'm sure there's some places we can definitely talk. So let's keep this. Obviously, it's going to be on an agenda item, continuing conversation, but let's keep it kind of top of the good of the cause conversations.
I was thinking about adding this to like we did the last time, every agenda until we come up with a solution. But I was going to do it after the budget was done, so like starting in May, pretty much.
I would be strongly in favor of that if everyone would be. And honestly, I think we should probably just start now, even if the conversations are relatively short until we get through the budget cycle.
I think one of the things we need to understand is what's that trigger? At what point do we could start planning for the what ifs, but at some point you need to say, where's the spot? Because it can't be when we need it, right? But it can't be now, right? We could do some work now, but what's that tipping point where we say, okay, this is it. Let's go. And I know that's an easier said than done to come up with that, but it's going to be a lot of conversation back and forth on what that tipping point is. So I think we got to figure it out. And I know it's not a perfect mathematical situation because where the dispersion of students comes from and everything, but at some point we've got to have an idea of like, okay, these 4 things happened or whatever it is. Where's that tipping point? I don't know.
What I think we also should probably start with what is acceptable and what's not acceptable. Is substandard space acceptable anymore in our town? I think that's a good question to get out there. Like if we say that it's not, well, there's one thing that we can't do. We're not gonna talk about trailers. We're not gonna talk about kids in hallways. Like those are done, right? If we're gonna also say our district policy on size of classes, it's a guideline, but we're not even close to those numbers. Maybe, like Mike, maybe just getting the things that we think are acceptable on the table, that'll rule some things out right off the bat, right? Like if we say these 5 things, we're not willing to budge on these 5 things. So it has to work around those 5. So maybe I could put that on the agenda the next time. Maybe we can have a conversation and maybe a meeting in March, we actually vote on these 5 things are our pillars that we're not willing to bend on. And then we can take it from there. I think that'll help us a little bit. It'll help, at least it'll rule out things that we're just not interested in. And I don't think we're interested in substandard space. And I don't think we're interested in maxing out the class sizes, right? So that'll help us, that'll help the administration too, guide us a little bit on possible solutions.
There were other things that we discussed during the meeting, but I want to follow up with what Dr. Forte said. Besides the substandard space, besides the increased classrooms, there was also brief mention about should we go back to not having dedicated classrooms for art and music, which I know was a sensitive topic during the strategic meeting. So the ripple effects is profound when it comes to conversations like this, and I think that's a fantastic idea. Mr. Anderson, you mentioned what's the trigger. Currently, the annex has the opportunity or the potential for more classrooms on the second floor. I think most of the board actually knows that. And, Dr. Forte mentioned during the meeting earlier today that to renovate them is not going to be cost prohibitive. Really, the question is, what's the demographics going to look like 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Everyone's mentioned that it is cyclical, and that's definitely true. And so that's why, Mr. Anderson, your comment about expanding or renovating is out of the question. I mean, I think each board member has to ask that question. Do we want to go through that process where we would want to renovate one of the schools? Because if we did, the school would be part of the school would have to be shut down as well. So there's a lot of different moving parts, and I think it would be behoove each board member to start thinking about all those moving parts, and even just, I don't know if we want to discuss it with the public just yet, but start asking the questions mentally. And if you have questions about what might have already been discussed in previous board members with previous sessions, then reach out to other board members as well to see what about other thoughts and suggestions that we may not have talked about tonight. So.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that needs to be discussed when you think about this is what we need to, do we want to wait until the trigger where we can get state funding if we want to do so, right? It all comes into play, right? Because if you do it too early, the state's not going to provide any money, right, Steve? Because they're going to say you're not in need of it.
You know what's
You do too
tough
late.
is new space. They're not going to give us much for, like, no matter what, almost nothing, unless we had like way overcrowded schools right now. They would give us something. But remember when Dover was going for their thing? Did you notice that it was something like 50 million and it was only going to be like 5 million or something from the state? It wasn't a lot. So new construction, you don't get that much in debt service aid.
All right, well, I mean, the good news about that is it actually makes the decision easier then, right? I mean, that's,
It just brings it, it's another piece of it.
No,
It's just,
absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, it sounds to me like, I mean, I think the way forward is, and I think, Steve, your suggestion is the right first step, is let's talk about coming up with our core values, right? Our 4 or 5 things that either are critically important or things that lines we won't cross. Like, let's start there. And then
I'm gonna make like a document or something for next meeting. We're gonna talk about it and we're gonna check off the things that we think are good, if you guys are good with that. And I think all of us should think about what happened in the strategic planning when you're doing it, right? We asked these 122 people to come. We don't look good if we don't want to listen to any of the stuff they want to say. So try to remember the things they said and let's embed that in these 4 or 5 pillars that we're going to stick to. To me, that would be a good starting point at this time where we are right now.
The only thing I'll say about that, Steve, is remember we said, when you talk about strategic planning, we said, hey, if you had unlimited budget, what would you do, right? So they might say, I want classrooms with 5 kids, but when you tell them that their tax bill is going to quadruple, then all of a sudden they want classrooms with 20 kids, right? Like, so yeah, you just got to be careful on, I don't disagree with you, but I think we got to keep all that in mind.
But I think the themes were a little more universal than that. I think the themes were, we don't want large class sizes. We do want arts embedded in the curriculum. So I mean, I think that's the spirit. I think we can probably take into the discussions.
I agree. What's the definition of a large classroom, right? Like they haven't seen, like Steve said, we've been well under even what's in the policy for years. So like, do you want that? That's not even our policy right now. It just happens to be what we're able to provide, and certainly provides a great educational experience. But yeah, it's hard to understand where that line is, right? So, but I think it's something we really need to think about and really kind of take a look at, even as we're talking about budgeting, right? Those are kind of things that can come into play.
Also, let's face it, if the public going to support a large scale project to keep class sizes below the already approved limits for just a few years? Or are they going to be okay with them going a little higher? Like, you know, I'm going to be the one, I know you guys are going to be behind me, but I'm going to be one out there trying to sell this. That's a pretty tough sell if you're saying to everybody, hey, we're going to do this for 5 years because we're going to have a little bit of a blip. And because of that, we want to keep our class size so low, or they would have to go up to 22, which is already our board approved maximum. So I think those are, you know, getting those kinds of things on the table with this pillars would be a good start. Right. And I agree with you, Mike, too. I was meaning it. I meant it more in a general sense. Like we brought them out. It wouldn't look good if we brought them all out and didn't at least consider some of the things they said. And I know that Charlene did say, if you have the unlimited budget, you know, what would you do? Obviously, we do whatever you want. But, and, you know, when it comes down to practicality, there is still, you know, a money thing here. And let's just assume we're not going to get much debt service aid when we go forward if we do something like this, because I really don't think we're going to get much. So I don't even think that's going to really be a big item. The only thing we'll get debt service aid of 40% is like any renovations that we also tie in. And probably like if we did an addition, say at Riverview, we'd probably get the money for the elevator that we would need, things like that, but we really wouldn't get it for the space.
One thing to keep in mind, we talk about the class sizes. You know, whatever we end up doing is that if you want to keep the sizes the way they are now, you would need, besides, you know, building for more space or renting more space, you need more teachers. And that's going to, you know, be, we got to generalize it. We want to start drilling down on that, but that's going to be another addition, putting on more help to deal with more students to keeping the sizes where they're at. As for the substandard space, I don't think anybody is in favor of it. We don't really have numbers on, you know, addition we threw out, you know, it was one time it was 10 million. It's probably double that now, maybe even more. We don't know exactly how many more classrooms we need. You know, so the substandard space, when some people are starting looking at a referendum and the taxes going up, they might think that's viable. I mean, I don't like it, especially with the mass shootings we've had at schools. I really don't want the kids in the trailers anymore. But again, that's something we did in the past. We eventually got rid of them. So, and I don't remember the cost, what it was to put one of those up. You have to have plumbing, electric, and all of that. But it was a solution at one time. So it's just a very complex problem. As James said, a lot of moving parts, especially with the difficulty in, you know, trying to purchase you know, the annex, or working out one of the creative solutions you had there, which I thought were really, really good.
Could I ask a question with regards to sort of that cyclicality of student enrollment? Do the other board members feel that the amount of development in Denville is going to cool off after the surge that we've had over the past 5 years? Or is there a risk that there will be continued development as the popularity of Denville grows and there's more and more demand for housing?
I don't know how much open space is left to put in these big developments, these cluster developments. I mean, all these developers want to do the townhouses crammed together with the affordable housing allocation there. I think most of the areas in town now that had 1 acre zoning for the homes, that's finished. So we'd have to check the township to see if there's any other large parcels owned by developers to be developed. And at some point, you know, they really could have a negative effect on the quality of the town, all this cluster housing that's going in. Right now, Denville's a great town, but those of you that may have to get around during rush hour at certain times of the day, it's really tough. You can wait a long time to, you know, get on Diamond Spring Road, starting at 3 o'clock when the schools get out, and there's lots and lots of cars getting out of work. Same thing with Route 10. So it might get to the point where it really affects the quality of life.
It's a good question, James. I think there's probably 7 opinions on that up here. I think we have to rely on our demographer. And I think Dom makes a good point, right? The town has spent a boatload of time looking at every parcel in town for the whole COA housing stuff. So we have to rely a little bit on kind of understanding that. I think the bigger question is the turnover in-house, what Dino's talked about, right? The turnover in housing, if that continues, because that, to me, you can only build so much of these cluster housing and you can only get so many students out of them at a time. But as the housing turnover continues, if we continue to see young families wanting to come to Denville because it's a great town to raise your family in, there's already existing a lot more houses in town. So that is something to consider too. Not knowing every detail. Yeah, Steve and I have looked at these numbers and it's a cyclical kind of up and down, and we thought there was going to be an up years ago. It didn't really go up. Right. And so that's why part of this is a little bit of wait and see. And part of it is let's plan while we're waiting and seeing so that we're not like behind the eight ball come if we have to do something or if we feel like something's got to happen. It's a good question. I don't know if I don't know if I have the answer outside of what the demographer can say. And unfortunately, the demographer is 5 years out. So
Let me give you a little context. So 2007, 2008 was the highest on record since 1979 of students in the district, and we had 1,980 students. That went down in 2021 to 1612. Now we're back up to 1696. And the demographer predicts an increase, not a decrease, not a huge increase, but somewhat of an increase. And because of all the new requirements on special education and things like that, our classes rooms are being utilized. There's not like classes with tumbleweeds growing in them. Everything's being done. So I can see that even though we might not get back to that 1980 number, I don't mean the year 1980, 1,980. I can still see if we do have an increase, it's going to stress the buildings, and it will change the way we're operating now, meaning our class sizes have to go up, and we might have to not have all the specials have their own rooms. Like sometimes they might have to have shared rooms and things like that. So that's where we're at right now, I think.
Yep, go ahead, John. It's a very popular choice.
No, the church, we have a lease and we have options for up to 20 years. So we're year 4, so we have 16 more years of options. And it's just a lease. They don't want to sell. Patterson.
you'd be shocked how full those buildings are right now. Yeah, it's probably the
The
the highest he's had in
office
30 years.
space is going begging. Industrial space is actually full up.
Yeah, and even that office space that building is actually pretty more full than you would expect. St. Clair's has like 2 floors of it.
But I think John makes a good point, and James, to your point, is that I think what you're going to see in Denville, regardless of what happens in the next couple of years with the developments that are being built, is it's going to be the increase in density. you're going to have stuff rezoned, you're going to have stuff going up, you're going to have more, so it's going to be more people per square mile than the Metroplex is just going to continue to push out. I think that's the really big, ugly challenge for us.
That's something that I noticed. I grew up in Fort Lee, and the density in there, it continued to grow, and I couldn't figure out how you can fit so many families in just such little square footage. But if that is let's assume that may be a problem that we'll have 10 or 20 years from now. So in the near term, I think we'll be okay. If we use Dr. Forte's sort of range, right, from 1,600 to 1,900 or 2,000, I guess, we could try to plan for, anywhere from 18 to 1,900 students. And if we can fit, 1,700 now, then we would technically need to try to fit another 100 to 200 kids. So I think if we just, maybe took some sort of short-term approach, started there after we talked about our 5 pillars and stuff like that, we can begin to start building a picture. And then from there, we can decide what our options are. So, that'll be sort of an interesting discussion. And I think we will have some very interesting meetings over the next couple months. So
I think what's interesting is if you look at the cyclical nature, though, the valleys are not as low and the peaks are higher. So the trajectory continues to go up. So like, for instance, if you look at the data that Dr. Forte put together last year, 86, 87, I think it was that was 1,196 students. We're never going to see 1,196 students in this district ever again. Then again, 1979, that was a peak. And then, now we're kind of at that bottom some point down a few years ago. Well, guess what? That's nowhere near 1,196. So those valleys are going to not be as deep. They just kind of trajectory up. So I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm guessing that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, and exactly. Right. Yeah. So, and the carrying capacity of each room goes down because we have to provide more services, and we have to provide them in more specialized ways. So a classroom that could carry 20, 30 kids is no longer capable of doing that, across the district. So yeah, you factor all that together. It's only an upward trend, right? There's going to be noise, but it's just an upward trend.
I think that comment's huge. I agree 100%. And I think the other side to it, just as I'm thinking about it, is if we had this project 10 years ago, the cost to build would have been dramatically less than as if we were to start now, right? So if we were to just kick the can down the road 10 years later, how much more of a burden might it be for the district if we didn't plan something now? So I think, every argument has everything has two sides to it. So, there's definitely pros and cons, but I love what Mike is saying, find a building and buy it. I think that is the path of least resistance. But at the same time, we may have to have a contingency plan if there's nothing like that. So, yeah.
And just for a second, Mike, going back to your data, I just started thinking about what Dr. Grip put together too. On page 10, in 1980, the population of the town was 14,380. He's projecting the population in 2030 to be 17,500. So yeah, those valleys probably won't go because there's just going to be a lot more people. So he's expecting a 2.3% population increase from 2020 to 2030.
Yeah, well, let's face it. There's just more houses from 1986, right? There's a boatload more.
Right.
There's a lot more.
That
retail.
whole south side down past 10, and then also the condos and townhouses by Berkshire, all that wasn't there.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And listen, Mr. Kim, I don't want to give a prediction, but there's a high likelihood we're not successful at finding somebody that's going to want to sell their building, right? I get it, but we certainly, when you get to the point of saying, I don't have another choice, I want to truly be able to say, I don't have another choice. I looked at all the options. I've looked at everything. And, I think it's a good, you make a good point about if we built 10 years ago, the only thing is we're not building a building. Back to Mr. Cass's point, the building has staff. The building has carrying cost. So if you built a building 10 years ago, your staff and carrying costs may have outbeat what you would have waited to build it. So if it was like just build a field and whether it's used or not, it's different. That's where it gets really, really complex when you talk about this. That's why I keep saying we got to pick the point at which, when is it we're going? We're like, go or don't go. That's the problem right now. We're kind of between, we don't know when to say that.
You know, the overhead for the new middle school that was proposed when I first joined the board, and Mr. Parisian would remember this, it was estimated $1 million per year to support that school, aside from building it, you know, the utilities, the staff, the custodians, all of that stuff. And if you did it today, I'm sure it'd be much more money to have staff in that school.
One thing to think about, by the way, just going back to the budget, not that I'm trying to change subjects, but we should pull together the data on the debt service costs to taxpayers previously, because remember, we don't have that. Granted, that's a few years ago that we finished off paying off the debt services, but I think it's an important piece because that debt services was not in the budget, but it was a cost to the taxpayers. So I think it's important to take into all the cost into factor when we're presenting back to the public for our budget this year.
All right, let's put a pin in this. I think we have a plan forward for the next couple of months, the next meetings for sure. If everyone's okay, let's move on to board highlights for tonight.
I have SSDS report, the audit, State Police ICE Safety Program, and the 23-24 preliminary budget presentation will be on March 13th. That's what I have for the 4 points. Does anybody else have anything else?
I got a couple of things.
For this or for just good to the cause?
Other highlights or something?
Go to the cause.
Okay.
I have.
Okay, then I think
If
we're
Dr. Forte's done,
Then I think we're good.
yeah, lighten up the subject matter a little bit.
Go ahead, Don.
I'm the liaison for the Riverview PTA, so I got to attend their meeting the other night, and it was very impressive. I got there early because they were doing a tricky trade meeting, so they had about 18 moms there stuffing envelopes and talking about the various components. So anybody here that has a business, would like to make some type of donation, like many businesses and organizations do, you know, they're ready to go, accepting donations. So that's a big help to them. And Corinne Petrillo, is the president of PTA, I told you so. I'm very impressed with her running the meeting. She, you know, everybody had a chance to talk, but she said, you know, the key is trying to get everybody out by 9 o'clock because they had to get the kids up the next day to go to school and everything. But they had, I could see they sit in the square, but I counted like 38 people there for the PTA, actual PTA meeting. And Mrs. T was there. She gave a report and update. So it was a very well-done meeting and very impressive with the dedication of everybody that was there. The other thing I'll mention too, you probably saw it, that eventually most of our kids go up to Morris Knolls or Morris Hills, depending on what they want to take. And Dr. Gincarelli is moving on. He's retiring. So you probably saw the thing up there. We're doing a meeting with the parents on February 16th, 7 p.m. And they have a search firm, Strategic Educational Advantage, which almost like our strategic plan, getting input from parents as they begin their superintendent search to where we place them. And that's just you really have to have a really good experienced person there. It's a massive operation there with 2 high schools and the buildings and grounds, maintaining that, and the classes, all the teachers and everything. It's so you really need a real good person there to continue what they're doing.
Great, thanks, Don. Good.
Just one more thing for good of the cause. This weekend, I had the opportunity to go to the Lakeview Elementary Talent Show. Saw Cliff there. It was nice to see you. I just want to congratulate the over 100 students and the PTA and all of the parents who participated and volunteered their time to make it such a wonderful event. There was 2 shows, so if you're lucky enough to go to both shows, you were there from 11 a.m. until about 5 o'clock, I think it was over. So many talented students, so many. I appreciate the parents so much. It's not an easy task. So I just want to say thank you to the PTA and to the parents who volunteered to have that talent show for Lakeview.
Great, thank you.
Two quick things. First of all, I just, and I sent this to Dr. Forte individually, but I just want to say it at a public meeting. I've had a few interactions recently with our director of transportation for either personal stuff or heard about it through the grapevine, and she's just phenomenal. She helped me and my family out when there was a situation. My son fell asleep on the bus, ended up at Lakeview, and she literally offered to get a small bus to bring him home. We got to go pick him up. It wasn't a big deal, but her kindness of offering that was above and beyond what she needed to do. And I don't know if the board knew this, but we had sent a bus to the boys' basketball championship game. On the way back, it broke down. It only had the bus driver and the coach, Mr. King, on the bus. And Stacy went and picked them up. It was a Saturday evening at like probably 6, 7 o'clock or something like that. She went and picked them up on Route 80 and brought them home. So she's just really kind of stepped up and done a lot of things recently. I just wanted to publicly thank her for everything she's been doing up at the transportation department. That was one thing. And then the other thing was I did have the opportunity to go to both the boys and girls championship basketball games, and just the community was unbelievable how many fans and parents and students, and it was a great environment. And obviously, girls had a great turnout and a great win, but the boys played phenomenally, and just a great support from the entire community. So thanks for everybody that supported Valley View Athletics.
Great, thank you. Anyone else? Everybody else good? Okay. If there's nothing else, we're going to move on to the second public comment section of the evening. This is our any items germane to the district. Since I read this text in before, I'm not going to read it again. I'm just going to go ahead and open up public comment at 8:46 p.m.
No one's in the, no other members of the public are in the online meeting.
Great, thank you. All right, seeing no one in the chamber approach, I'll close also at 8:46 p.m. We do have need for an executive session. We do not anticipate voting after that executive session. Steve, what are the items we're going to be discussing tonight?
Student matters, personnel matters, and legal matters.
Mrs. Zadelis, could I ask you to move us into executive, if you wouldn't mind? You okay? Or I know you don't have to. It's okay. It's all right. It's okay. I'll tap Mr. Anderson then.
No problem. If there are no objections, I'd like to move to convene an executive session in accordance with Section 8 of the Open Public Meetings Act. Purpose of this closed session will be to discuss student matters, legal, and personnel matters. Minutes of this session will be made available to the public when the need for confidentiality no longer exists.
Could we add negotiations to that as well?
Absolutely. Student matters, legal, negotiations, and personnel.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, we're in executive session at 8:47 p.m.